Welcome back to our series on the three angels' messages. We've been talking about why Adventists make such a big deal about this text, and last time we situated these verses within the larger context of Revelation. In this video, we're going to talk about the first angel's message, so let's go. Hey, you look familiar. But if we haven't met before, I'm Matthew, and this is Peoria Adventists, a channel all about showing Seventh-day Adventism to internet people. And that involves some explaining about what Adventists believe, some showing what our church in Peoria is up to, and of course, some veggie meat. Now, in the first video, we talked about how these angels have the everlasting gospel, and that the gospel of Jesus isn't just that we are free from sin, but that sin itself is defeated, and that defeat of sin is what we see in Revelation. Now, the first angel's message goes like this. He said in a loud voice, "Fear God and give him glory, because the hour of his judgment has come. Worship him who made the heavens, the earth, the sea, and the springs of water." The first imperative to the world in this gospel message is fear God. What is the fear of God? Let's start with what it doesn't mean. It doesn't mean that we are afraid of God. About every single time God or some angel shows up, the very first thing they say is, "Don't be afraid." Nor does the fear of God mean some kind of just mere respect for God like we might have for an elder in the church or any woman with a big purse. To fear God basically means taking God seriously. It's not enough to believe in the existence of God. We actually have to live and act and believe as if God is, well, God. His existence has implications for my existence. We get a front row seat to the fear of God in the story of Joseph. When Potiphar's wife made a pass at Joseph, his response wasn't, "What if your husband finds out?" Or "I don't know," or "I don't know if I could do this to Potiphar." I mean, it's not that he wasn't concerned with what Potiphar would think or do, but his response was, "How then could I do such a wicked thing and sin against God?" Joseph was first and foremost concerned about what God would think if he did that, because he took God seriously. The angel also calls upon us to give God glory. Paul tells us that whatever we do, we should do it all for the glory of God, and that this basically means that we should aim our lives so that our lives build God up, that our lives show God respect, yes, that they are a blessing to him, that we honor God with our lives and with everything that we do in our lives. So like every decision has to run through this calculation of, if I do this, will it bring God honor? So the first angel tells the world to take God seriously and to give God glory. That's generally good advice, right? But he gives a reason why we are to take God seriously and give God glory, and that is because the hour of God's judgment has come. Not will eventually come, has come. Now, we don't think of judgment as good news, and that's why you have to keep the context in mind. You remember, the dragon's beasts are stomping all over the world, demanding worship, deceiving people, and killing all who get in their way. And if you are trying to follow God, then judgment is good news. If you've been hurt or wronged and you have a just judge and a fair judicial system, then you look forward to your day in court because that's the day of vindication. It's a day that people will believe you and healing can start. Now, this talk of judgment in Revelation 14 is really a link to Daniel chapter 7, where we see the Son of Man opening a courtroom judgment against those beasts who persecute God's people and aim for God's throne. Judgment, an angel tells Daniel, was given in favor of the saints. The beasts lose, and so God's judgment is good news. Now, this idea of judgment also reminds us of the Day of Atonement, that festival where the Israelites would confess their sins and humble themselves before God. The high priest would then enter the most holy place to make atonement for all of Israel's sins in the presence of God. It was a day of judgment, a day to make sure that you are right with God and that you aren't holding on to any sins. So just let them all go, right? Like don't cherish them, just confess them. And so this reminder that God's judgment is here is a reminder to embrace moral purity, to stop flirting with whatever side sins you're interested in and commit fully and completely to God. Now, we are also told by this angel to worship God because he is the creator of all things. Specifically, the angel says, because he made the heavens, the earth, the sea, and the springs of water. Now, if that sounds familiar because you've memorized the entire Bible, it's because it's very similar to the Sabbath commandment in Exodus 20, where we are told to keep the Sabbath. Why? Because God made the heavens and the earth and the sea. And we are told to keep the Sabbath because God is the Creator. We are told to worship Him in Revelation chapter 14 here in these last days. Why? Because God is the Creator. And the Sabbath itself is an integral part of the worship of God. It was a day set apart for worship from the very beginning. So this broader call is to worship God, okay? Just to worship God. But then there's this language in that first angel's message, language borrowed from the Sabbath commandment, and that's got to be deliberate. So in some way, shape, or fashion, the Sabbath must play a role in this worship of God at the end of time. Worship is more than singing songs and just saying prayers. Worship is the affirmation of God's ultimate worthiness, His value above all other things, including ourselves. To worship the dragon is to esteem the dragon as greater than God, greater than all things. And since this final battle revolves around who we will worship, the first angel is therefore calling us to worship God, to choose God. But what makes God better than the beasts? Well, because He's the Creator. The fifth commandment tells us to honor our parents, but it doesn't tell us why, probably because nobody needed to be told why. The fact is that merely by giving life to you, your parents have earned your respect and honor for their entire lives. This was a fundamental moral principle in Israelite life, one that stemmed from the fact that God gave life to all, making Him the parent of all parents. And because life is the key to our very existence, right? We owe God that existence. So this first angel isn't calling us away to some grand quest, some very, very difficult thing, some unnatural thing. He's really calling us to return to the natural order of things. God has given us life, and so He alone is worthy of our worship. Duh, obviously, it was a common sense thing to the original readers. Now, by contrast, that invites us to ask, what did the beasts ever do for you? Nothing. They take, but they don't give, so you ought to reject them. They want your worship, the devotion of your entire being, but they didn't give you anything. So don't sell yourself short by worshiping them. You should only give yourself to one worthy of yourself, and only God is worthy of you. That, in a nutshell, is the first angel's message. We could go on and on and on about it, but I think that's a good glimpse at what that angel is talking about. Next week, we're going to talk about the second angel.